And our next speaker is Mma D. Mma D is the lead curator of the food journey and has lived and worked in rural and urban communities in West and East Africa, the Caribbean and the UK, embracing a diversity of learning on the subject on earth lividity. She also promotes natural sciences learning and is an advocate for consciously balanced human agency and systemic justice. Now, Mma D will be speaking on racial justice, food, climate, and environment. Mma, when you're ready, we're ready for you. Okay, Rakin, I'm just going to take your camera off and then put Mama's on.
Okay, hi, greetings. Greetings everybody from all the different places in the world that you're at. I could really sit down for a whole day, a whole week and talk about this subject. How do we relate racial justice to food, climate and environment? In a way, we can just, they're just words and we give them meaning according to who we are. I received this image as a WhatsApp text today, and I thought it was quite relevant. I don't know if I show it, you can see it properly, but it says, the future of Black people is not dependent on how white people treat us. The future of Black people is dependent upon how we treat ourselves. Oh, right. Trying to get you to see it. Image there of a couple of brothers. And I'd like to amplify that by saying it's not only how we're treated, but how we feel, we think, we experience. So the future of Black people is not dependent on how white people speak about us, write about us, talk about us, and treat us, but it's very much dependent on how we think about ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, how we move through life as people who have been structurally otherized, have been made abnormal and not normal, as Rakin made reference to. So, I mean, thinking a little bit first about racial justice, I mean, Rakin has said so much and I endorse, most of what he has said. But if we can think about what race is as a construct that has been arrived at by a people who are fundamentally out of balance with their environment. Now, if one looks at the ancient history of the people who invented the construct of race, then we see a people having to battle against an adverse and a difficult environment. They were always moving, original refugees, perhaps. And there was always a conquest and territory and seizing each other people's lands and people, mostly women. And I know that sounds like in some kind of environmental determinism or biological determinism, but that's exactly how the construct of race started. It was through really rough and ready biological determinism. Linnaeus was an early author of this, Carl von Linnaeus, a taxonomist, a Swedish taxonomist, who categorized humanity according to earlier constructs of the humors, um, there were four humours: the phlegmatic, the melancholic, the sanguine, and uh, choleric, sanguine, phlegmatic, and melancholic, I think. And the different races, the African, the European, um, and the red or the yellow man, the Asians of different areas, were categorized in a really rough and ready, totally unscientific um, way. And they were given, accorded different characteristics. What these constructs enabled was the ability for those who were constructing them, Europeans, to determine how these different categories of people should be interacted with and should be understood. This continued within European sciences by Blumenbach, who created a fifth category of that of the Malay, and decided that the European came from the Caucasus. They were therefore Caucasians, and these were the most brilliant and beautiful people in the planet. And as time passed, through the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, um, these categories were continuously built upon until we had a situation where there was only one normal human being, and that was the man that separated himself from spiritual ideas of what humans were and became secular or scientific man. And this, was built upon during the Enlightenment. And, as Descartes declared, cogito ergo sum, that I think, therefore I am, therefore being was associated with the mind and thinking and scientific progress. And all those that didn't follow that way of being and thinking were simply the body of the earth itself, and the body of those who could be employed to access the wealth that the earth represented. So we had, during expansionist imperialism and ensuing colonialism, references to the earth as a thing to be penetrated, indeed, as women were. We had talk of virgin forests and virgin lands to be landed upon. So when we're talking about land, perhaps we ought to be a little bit careful that we're not conflating the idea of territory over the earth that belongs to no one, because we actually belong to it. I decided some time ago that I needed to approach thinking about food, about these words, climate and environment, which are bandied around an awful lot by these post-Enlightenment thinkers who are found in universities, who are really sites of knowledge accumulation from other people, knowledge accumulation, and a kind of refinement according to a logic of this European normality. And so I decided, well, there must be other, there absolutely are other normals. And the normal that I inhabit, that's deriving from my African heritage, also has a whole philosophy and way of constructing and understanding what life is, what food therefore is, what this thing called the environment or the climate is. In fact, are there equivalent terms in all our different languages, all these otherized people, the non-Europeans? What kinds of meaning do we have for this, for what we interact with and how we interact with it? There are so many writers, thinkers, philosophers who come from totally different angles from Enlightenment thinking, that understand our relationship with each other and with the earth, with other forms of life on earth from different places. And these are some of the things that I would like to share in talking about food and climate and the environment. So I'm going to share my screen and go through a few slides. And yeah. Okay, so is the screen visible to everybody? I hope.
Yes, we can see it.
Right, so let me try and get this a little bit so I can see it too. Okay, thinking about, let's talk about food first. Let me see if I'm moving it. So here is a way of defining and thinking about food that may not be as common. I'm sure everyone here has their own definition, but I've defined it as that which we take into our bodies at all our levels of existence. So if we're thinking about bodies, we're thinking about our individual bodies, but we're also thinking about our bodies as family, our body as community, our body as the earth itself. So it's everything that's taken into all of these levels or scales of our bodies, yeah? It nurtures and it nourishes us at the level of the individual, right through to who we are as a community. And I would extend that to say who we are as planetary beings, yeah? Food, if we are to call it that, it engages and it enables both our personal and collective well-being. So what I would say is that anything that doesn't do this is not food. Now, if we consider all of the things that we take in, how much of that actually reflects these definitions, we'll find actually we're being thoroughly poisoned in most part. So I constructed a kind of schema to think about all of these things we take in, and this is part of a longer series of slides, but I just thought I would just show you here so you'd understand the structuring of it. So I looked at our sensory location, the point at which we were taking in from that which we understand as being outside of us. What is it that we receive via that sensory location? What is it that we're taking into our bodies? How is it affirmative and how is it destructive? So our mouths are where we most normally identify as taking in food, right? So we take in foodstuffs of a variety of kinds that we hope to be good for our bodies. We also take in air through our mouths. If it's affirmative, it's pleasant to eat, it's according to our culture, it's resonant with our knowledge of what is good, it can be shared, it's something that we socialize with, it's available at some kind of cost, it may not be a financial cost, it could be all kinds of other costs that we can afford though. These are costs that keep us in balance with our environments. It's safe for our bodies and it's safe at source and it's safe for the planet. That is food. So things that are toxic and noxious, yeah, that are taken in or on offer, when we're forced to eat food of other cultures which does not accord with our knowledge of what is good, cannot be shared or socialized with, is unavailable at a cost we can afford. And when I say cost we can afford, that is environmental cost as well as, you know, your purse cost, your financial cost. When it's unsafe for yourself, for this, where it is obtained from, if it's unsafe at the source and it's unsafe for the planet, how can it possibly be food? Yeah, it becomes poison. So consider what you take in. When you eat your next banana, drink your next cup of coffee, to what extent are you really meeting the cost? Is it in balance with how we want the planet to be? Is it? Is it in balance with even our purses? Often we buy things that we can't really afford to eat, right? But also, how does it impact the places where it's coming from? If it's killing people where it's coming from, you're taking in part of that death. Um, Later at the bottom of this series of slides, I've gone right to scale to think about, sorry, one moment. Sorry, could you open the door for me? So, sorry. So at the level of community, what we take in is the opportunity to learn, to understand what it means to be human. It shapes what we feel it is to be civil, to have a politic, to be social, and to observe what we consider to be normal, and that's going to vary for each culture. It's our point of departure for our relationship with all aspects of the planet. And if it's affirmative, then it's creative, welcoming, tolerant, and thriving. It enables us to respond to new opportunities after being able to evaluate them well. It possesses critical thinking and a happy, optimistic outlook. It nurtures, cares for, and respects the planet. It means that we can live healthily. But if it's toxic, if the nourishment we're receiving at community level causes us to be depressed, inward looking, violent, unable to make use of opportunities, to be fatalistic and withdrawing, to be overcritical of everything that's new, to evaluate everything as damaging, undesirable, and unnecessary, to be extractive, damaging, or disrespecting to the planet, or to live unhealthily, then that means we're not being nourished at the level of community. We're being effectively poisoned by all that we take in at the level of community. And if we amplify that to the whole earth, then what we're taking in is our ability to survive as humans on the planet. If it's affirmative, then it welcomes diversity in the complex and sustainable ways that it can be, right? It contributes to each other's well-being across the entire planet. Boaventura de Sousa Santos talks about an ecology of being, knowledges which support that ecology of being. So we have all the different cultures, but we're co-supportive. In the absence of that, what we have is something like that picture, an uninhabited planet. And I would argue that that's what we're racing towards, because we have taken the European normal of inhabiting only our minds, i.e. scientific, so-called scientific knowledge, as the only route to relating to every and anything. The body is separate, it is a base. Everything that is associated with the body is inferior and can be dominated, extracted from, exploited. We live with a secular mind which only has financial, commodifiable, commercial value applied to everything. So let's go on. I would like to ask you, where, what, who do you come from? What is it that makes you you? Have you asked that question of yourself, and how would you respond to it? It's not something that generally people do think about, but I think it's part of being responsible on this earth, being accountable for everything that you relate to means that you have to be asking questions like this and responding to them in a responsible and accountable way. The next slide I am going to offer as an opportunity for you to think about this question, and I'm going to be narrating over the slide something that perhaps can help you jog your memories. So imagine yourselves as first people on the earth, and the earth is just forming. And what you're looking out at is a multiply colored horizon, and you are first person on the earth. You've nothing but your nakedness to contemplate, and the nakedness and the openness and the vulnerability of everything. And you have to assert for yourself, claim a pact with this earth of which you are a part. A pact that says, this is how nourishment is going to be going forth. This is how I'm going to be whole in a whole earth, a whole sound earth. To speak of myself, I am a descendant of people who have been part of one of the great circulations of people during the Anthropocene. I'll speak a bit more about what the Anthropocene is. My ancestors hail from deep earth, like all of us, risen from the soil, being made of its clays and its rocks, its fire, water, and importantly, its mycelia, that is its underground fungal growth. Somehow we took our first steps and became beings separate but still made of earth, needing to interface with all of its elements and having a nervous system made up of and mirroring the mycelium in the substrata of earth. Mycelia contains intelligence that communicates with all beings that are still attached to and relate very closely to the earth. With its intelligence, we moved across the face of the earth, intelligently interpreting its ways, living lightly, eating and being eaten, part of the earth ecology. But then there came the interruptions. Many of them swift and fast, and the lattermost was the great Ma'afa, the terrible holocaust of people ripped away from the African earth and leaving behind a human ecology of blood, bone, torn roots, ripped arteries, stories torn into parts, a loss of water and invasions of diseases. The ocean of tears that we crossed was fed by the desecrations also of Turtle Island, the Americas. The humans there were also pronounced as having no soul and so expendable and were massacred in great numbers, and both them and ourselves were put to work to create plantations of products to feed empire and to act as fodder for industrial revolutions. The world experienced, from the sweat of our enforced labor, major new circulations of things that were now commodities. Their beinghood had been taken from them. They had been converted into things or commodities. They had the quality of being property. And Catherine Yusuf speaks of, the laws of property, a thing belonging to someone, things belonging, goods, chattels, an attribute, quality, or characteristic of something. She also speaks about whiteness being established as a right to geography, to take place, to traverse the globe, and to extract from cultural, corporeal, and material registers, which was everything else. So we have to understand that when we are speaking about food, from whose position are we thinking about food? And the same applies to this idea of climate and environment, that these are categories of things that are just things. They don't have personalities. We don't exist in relation to them. It is indigenous or traditional to understand that we are Earth. We belong to this planet. We are made up of what we call the environment. We feel what the Earth feels. We experience what the Earth experiences. As ancient wisdom teachers have said, as above, so below, as within, so without. The macrocosm is a reflection of the microcosm. Climate, therefore, can be looked upon as a manifestation of our collective human vibration, our shared histories, whether or not they've been accounted for in the literature which is circulating in schools or universities, whether it's written down or not. Whether it's held in the detailed or general ways in which we relate to the rest of life, it's these things, we do have these shared histories and they impact upon us. These histories are held within life in all of the elements. We can speak of our air ecology, a soil ecology, a water ecology, or we can realize that all these things constitute each other, including our human ecology. We are not separate from the earth. So when we are speaking of climate, we need to understand that the climate reflects us and our histories, whether or not they've been spoken of. And indeed, I know that there have been studies, and I just couldn't identify exactly the document to share with you, but there have been studies, and you can do your research, and you ought to do your researching, you know, searching again, rediscovering the truths that we need to further our existence on this earth. That the Arctic Circle has imprints of the period that I refer to as the Ma'afa, others refer to as the Mangamizi, the Holocaust of life from enslavement. And that enslavement wasn't only, of course, European enslavement. It involved the enslavement of people referred to as Arabs. It also includes the enslavement of people from the area referred to as East Western Asia, because there has been this denudation of life from that continent ever since, because if that was the place where human ecology first started, then it has been desecrated ever since. And there are imprints of this in the earth, in the actual geology and geography of the earth. It makes one want to think about what really is gold, for example. What is oil? What are these aspects of the earth? What are they saying about our imprints on the earth, our relationship to these things? What does it say about us to the other elements of which we are made up of? The proportion, for example, of water and other elements in the earth are reflected in our bodies. We are what we eat. We also eat what we are. The Anthropocene, which I mentioned earlier, is actually a description of our intertwined ecology over the last 600 or more years. It defines how we engage with all of the earth elements, and it stands in silent testament to our collective and interdependent trauma and joy. We need to understand about the period of colonialism and the racism that you know was its lifeblood, that these these things have impacted all of us. Mrs. talked about the boomerang effect, in which the trauma that was created in the traditionally understood victims of, say, enslavement or any form of harsh, violent colonialism, actually must affect the people who are perpetrators. And we need to understand perpetrator trauma and how that is held in the body, in the institutions, in the structures, in the very systems in which that we live with today. The laws, the legal systems describe relationships of superior and inferior, of things that have life and don't have life. In fact, in schools, we're taught that there are living and non-living things, but that is a falsehood. Yeah, we are now understanding how living the soil is. But in, you know, when I was going to school, it would have been understood as a dead material, and we treat it accordingly. Do you know how much soil is exported to the cities we increasingly live in? So, you know, we're denuding our life force to accumulate in cities, and we don't even recycle it. We don't recycle all that stuff that we're getting from the soil, be it oil in forms of plastics and this kind of thing, or whether it's nitrogen that comes to us as protein. We're not recycling these things. So there's this accumulation. As cities grow, it's abstracting from what is referred to as the rural, an improvident move, if ever there was one. So when we're thinking about nourishment, it really requires that we intentionally relate in both time and space. The concept, the Zulu concept of Ubuntu, which is found all over Bantu Africa, there is a concept which is about relationality. It says, we are because I am, and I am because we are. So the individual and the collective are understood to have a recursive relationship, a fractal relationship. And the we are is all of life. It's not just limited to the human. Nourishment requires that we become, all of us, indigenous to the earth. And what indigeneity means in this context is being responsible and accountable. Yeah, as I spoke about before, indigeneity is something that is a product of the colonial project, if you like, of classifying people as either humanitas, which were the Europeans, or anthropos, which was everybody else, which meant anthropology was the study of the anthropos. So we classified these others who related to the earth, who were the body of the earth, and we studied them, and not the humanitas, who was the European. So the indigenous were the anthropos people, the people who were connected to the earth, because of course in Europe we're disconnected, aren't we? We're just our minds, we're just our secular, we are the beings that commodify the rest of the earth, the body of the earth. But now we're coming to understand that being indigenous is about a real responsibility and accountability for our collective selves. But we need to understand ourselves as always having to be responsible and accountable. So we're all indigenous. Else, what are we? What is the opposite of indigenous? Irresponsible and not accountable. That sounds like a lot of what's perpetuated in the earth at the moment. Nourishment requires that we recognize ourselves to be a pluriverse of multiple and intersecting ecologies, which is non-hierarchical, without a hierarchy of inferior and superior. We need to revisit these categorizations in order to understand the sickness and the dis-ease that we have, and why we're toxifying ourselves instead of nourishing ourselves. Nourishment requires that we abandon human-made categories which create limitations to life, that we embrace being over doing and having. So we need to think about activism, which is caught up with doing without ever reflecting. It's caught up in a traumatic, I must do this thing to absolve myself of historical guilt, without ever really facing what that historical guilt, how it manifests in the earth. So it's not responsible and accountable, most activism. Yeah. Okay, looks like it's come to the end of my slides. How much time have I got left?
1 minute.
Okay, well that's that's great. As I said, I could speak for days and weeks on this subject. I think we have to begin to approach understanding racial justice is part of climate justice, is part of environmental justice. It's about just justice, yeah, and enabling not universalisms which are false, but ecologies of knowledges which can describe our relationship to each other and to the planet in ways which are going to be both responsible and accountable. Okay, that's me.
Thank you, Mma D. That was wonderful.